Okay, well, it looks like it is 1 o'clock. We are now recording, so I will officially welcome everyone to Garden in the Panhandle Live. This is a regular thing we've been doing for a while now, where the agents in the Northwest District get together and answer questions live that people submitted. And today's episode, we are doing bulbs for Florida, so bulbs for North Florida specifically. And I'm Mark Tanzig, by the way. I'm the horticulture agent in Leon County, and I have two other extension agents helping me today on the camera. We got a couple others in the background. But let's see, Beth and Josh, in that order, introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Beth Bowles over here in Pensacola area. Glad to be here.
And I'm Josh in Milton over here in Santa Rosa County.
And yes, in the background, so thank you, Beth and Josh. They're going to answer lots of y'all's bulb questions. And we also have Julie McConnell from Washington County. She's in the background running all the other stuff that's going on here. As we're answering questions, so I'll post some questions to Beth and Josh, and Julie, check for those folks on Zoom, check your chat screen because Julie's going to be putting up references for those answers. And we'll go ahead and get started. And I want to start with both of you all, and please explain to me what in the heck do we mean really by a bulb? And are there plants that we sometimes call bulbs that aren't really truly by botanist terms a bulb? So can you help us figure this out a little bit?
You want me to go, Josh, or?
Yep, go ahead. You can have
All
at
right.
it.
Yeah, so a lot of times in the plant world, we use a lot of fun names to group things together. And this talk was all about bulbs, and your questions were about bulbs. But we have things called true bulbs, which are a very interesting plant. And as y'all know, everything underground, that storage organ is there in order to have that food, in order to produce this beautiful plant that usually has a very interesting flower. But what makes it a bulb is that it has a basal plate and roots come out of that, and it's kind of a little growing point. It's going to be the leaves and the flower buds, and then that's surrounded by these fleshy kind of scales, and that's a true bulb. And so an
Mhm.
example of a true bulb would be our daffodils and true lilies. So those are two that do really well for us that we're going to talk about today. And then I'll let Josh talk about some of the other things we call bulbs, but maybe not true bulbs.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different storage organs that you could, that's how we're referring to them underwater. They're kind of just like a stem tissue. It stores a lot of carbohydrates so that they act as the growth point. Um, and there's a lot of different types of that. Things like um, oh my gosh, now I'm blanking, of course. Things like ginger and turmeric, things like that. They're not really a bulb. They grow from a rhizome that grows underground. It's a similar situation that they have going on, and that it's a storage unit or a storage tissue that's underground, and it's actually much more of like a stem tissue, but they're not actually a bulb. They don't have that basal plate. That's not where their root, that's not their root points. They will grow and they will actually run. So things like that are not what we would consider bulbs, but you could see where people might make that conflation. So just to
And
keep everybody in
can
place, that's where we're at with that.
can I quiz you because I'm thinking of something like agapanthus or maybe what was the other one I just had in my head? Crinum lily. What do we
Mhm.
got there? Are those bulbs? Are they bulb-like?
Yeah, we have some true
Yeah.
bulbs in there, like with the
Uh-huh.
crinum. But we have things like tuberous roots on daylilies.
Hmm.
There's a lot, like Josh mentioned, ginger. There's a lot of underground rhizomes. We have corms, like our gladiolus. That's a compressed
Yep.
stem. So all of those
Mhm.
things we sometimes just lump in the world of bulbs. And so, although today we're going to talk about some of the true bulbs, we'll probably throw in some of those related plants that have an underground storage structure.
Okay, well, for those of you that want to know more, I'm sure Julie put something in there, but go do a deep dive on true bulbs and see what you find. Okay, now let's get into first of all, right plant, right place, right? That's our Florida friendly principle number one. And can you all, what are some of these bulbs that will thrive for us in North Florida and that are, hopefully a little bit low maintenance? What you got for us? Beth and Josh, you fight over it.
Okay. So the good thing is we always think of when we get these magazines and we see the Michigan Bulb Company and things from overseas in Europe, that these wonderful fields of tulips and all sorts, some of that is not going to be for Florida. And so we need to think about what's going to grow here, like Mark mentioned, right plant, right place. But we have a world of bulbs that we can grow here. And so if we're looking for some of those things that are going to do well, you already probably have some of these in your landscape. Like we mentioned, probably the most common one that's called the cemetery bulb is the crinum lily. That is one that does very well. If you love true lilies, those do extremely well also. We're going to talk a lot about the winter blooming daffodils that grow. Amaryllis will be a wonderful spring color. And then we have some of these interesting plants that you can think about, including gingers. We have blackberry lily, that's a structure, pineapple lily, and all sorts in between. So we're going to cover quite a few of those today. But don't be afraid thinking, oh, Florida, it's too hot. No, we do have a good climate that we can grow a lot of these bulbs and have a good season throughout the whole year for color.
So now, what about tulips, though? Can we pull off tulips?
So I can answer that one. So tulips you could grow as an annual here. If you wanted to keep them year after year, though, the chill hours that they require are just way too high for anything we get in North Florida. And so if you wanted to keep them year after year, it creates a whole lot of work and makes them not really Florida friendly because you're having to go in there and dig them out every year and then stick them in your fridge or in your freezer to get those chill hours. And you're going to wind up doing that for months on end because they need a lot of chill hours. There's a reason they grow in the Netherlands, which is longitudinally on par with Canada. Um, but there's a reason that they grow there because they like a lot of cold, and we're just not getting that cold here. So if you wanted to keep them year after year and not just buy new bulbs every year, you're going to have to dig them out and put them somewhere cold for however long that cultivar says that it needs it.
So it's like our for some of our fruit trees, right? We can't grow
Yeah.
apples very well because we don't get that chill. So it's very similar. All right.
Hmm.
Um, let's see. Um, where might be a good place to find some bulbs? You mentioned daffodils as a good one for us. Now, where could we potentially go and find, Beth, some bulbs to purchase that would work for Florida?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it is hard to go to your local nursery and find the adapted ones for our area. You can still try some of those in the daffodil world. You may have success with a few of them once they adjust because they may be coming in from a different area, but some of them may not work. So that's always kind of a test for you. But for some of the tried and true ones we're going to mention throughout the program here today, there are some nurseries that they're not necessarily in our area, but we're going to put the list of those in the chat. And one's in Michigan, Virginia, North Carolina, or South Carolina. And then sometimes even our local nurseries will carry some of these. But we have some really good daffodils that do well for us. If we kind of look at the season of daffodils, you can kind of start really, really early bloom with Chinese sacred lily. You can come on, especially February and March, with things like Barrett Browning, with Sweetness. It's going to be a little bit later. Ice Follies. I always lose my train of thought here. I'll have to look at my list here. Early Cheer. My absolute favorite daylily for our area is called Ceylon. Ceylon has a yellow petal with an orange cup. It is absolutely stunning that blooms in March. Some of these are going to be a single flower. Some of these are going to be a flower stalk with just florets all over them. And then you're looking at ones that offer fragrance too. Yep. So example, that Sweetness is going to give you a little hint of fragrance, and some of those others will be very intensely fragrant. So we do have these good Florida daffodils that you can order from some of these nurseries. And one of those nurseries will even say, hey, these are the ones for Florida. These are the ones you want to get. So just be aware. Sometimes if you do order some of the ones for Florida, even from a little different area, they may just have to adjust a little bit.
All right. Thanks very much. Now, you kind of mentioned some of the bulbs and bulb-like plants, but is there a way, what would be maybe some combinations of bulbs that we might be able to plant together to get a nice extended period of bloom? Because sometimes I mean, sometimes they can last a pretty good amount of time, but the bulbs, they don't stand, the blooms don't, most of them don't tend to stick around too long, that's what I'm thinking. So is there a combination of these bulbs we could put together to get a nice extended bloom period?
Yeah, so there is quite a few that you can actually put together. I very often see agapanthus and crinums planted next to each other, and that gives you not just a color variation, but it does. Crinums tend to have a little bit longer blooming period, from what I've noticed. So you can do that. You can also just check the blooming period, and then you want to try to overlap as much as you can. So you have your daffodils. They might feed into your agapanthus that are much more of a summer bloomer, and then those, like right now, the hurricane lilies. Every time I drive everywhere, I'm seeing those pop up. I think they're also called blood lilies are popping up
Mhm.
all over the place right now, those little red poofs everywhere. So it's
Mhm.
really a matter of just doing your research and timing it, timing those plantings.
Yeah, Beth, you want to add anything?
Yeah, we in the summer months, we have a huge number that are blooming. So, we often think about the Easter lily that we get around the holiday time, but the lilies are really summertime blooming bulbs. And in the lily world, you have some of the hybrids that stay shorter, some of the Asiatic lilies that are stunning in flower. And then you have some of these species lilies that get really tall with these huge, gorgeous white flowers. So those are good summertime to go with your crinums, to go with some of your others. Right now in our garden, the blackberry lily's still going pretty strong. That looks beautiful. It's going to give you a nice fan type foliage, and then you'll have these little stalks of tiny little kind of orange speckled flowers that kind of go there. Now, early on with the daffodils, if you don't mind kind of a pseudo bulb, you can think about something like the Chinese ground orchid. It's going to give you kind of that bulb-like strappy foliage with a pink flower above it. So that will extend your daffodil season a little bit until your amaryllis come on, until your crinums, and then like Josh mentioned, that beautiful hurricane lily in the fall.
Right. It's a nice, you got early year all the way to the fall there. So thank you very much. This question just came up in the chat, and we're now going to move into some of the maintenance type stuff that goes along with growing bulbs. And so this idea of overwintering. So do we have to do this? How should we overwinter our bulbs? And I will give this to Beth. What's the best way to do? How do we deal with this overwintering thing?
Well, the good thing y'all know we're pretty mild here. So it's not a case for most of our bulbs that we need to worry about digging them up, removing them. Many of them can stay in the ground because we rarely freeze in the ground. The tops freeze. For some of these, if you have kind of a sensitive one, you could put a little mulch as long as some of that mulch is pulled away when some of the bulbs are ready to come back. The key in the winter months for us that bulbs really struggle with is if we are wet. So if we go through a wet winter and the soil holds a little bit of water, that's where you're going to have trouble with your bulbs in the ground. So if you know it's kind of an area that in the winter stays a little moist, it's maybe just a little bit shaded or something, you may have to think about maybe I want to dig that up and hold it, but really that's a lot of work. So most of our bulbs are just going to stay put. Don't water too much. Let the rain take care of it. You don't want to have an area where you're fertilizing in the winter at all. So it's really not going to be with an overseeded lawn. If you need to care for that or care for other plants, you kind of just let them go, let the foliage die and wait until next spring and they'll be back for you.
All right, Beth, you just mentioned wait until the foliage dies. So someone wants to know, should they prune back that foliage? Like should they prune it back before it kind of goes all the way dormant and kind of clean it up?
No, and that's going to be hard with, especially let's think of daffodils. We have these leaves and blooms that come out, and then the blooms fade, and the foliage kind of it collapses, and it looks terrible in the garden, especially if that's our feature. You have to leave that alone. Those green leaves, as long as they're green, they're making food, storing that back in the bulb, and that can be one of the reasons you have poor blooming if you cut back too early before all that food gets, shoved back into that bulb. So even though it looks bad, let the foliage completely die on its own, let it fall over, let it just go. Don't cut it or wrap it up or anything like that. And it will hopefully get enough food back to that bulb. It's hard to do. It looks terrible. So think about your design, plant other stuff around it to kind of take the view away from that foliage as it's dying back.
Thank you, Beth. Let's see here. Josh, we have these bulbs, and a lot of times they spend a good amount of time, after they shed their leaves, they're kind of underground for a while. How do we keep these dang varmints from getting to our burrowing down in the soil and eating our bulbs?
Oh, isn't that the question we have for every plant in our garden is how do we keep the critters away? Um, for the most part, you're going to have to know what's around. Getting a trail cam and putting it out there so that you know what kind of critter you're dealing with quite often will help. Physical barriers are about the only way, and that comes things like fruit trees. You're going to have to put bird nets up, or the birds are going to get your fruit, assuming you don't want to share the fruit with your birds. A lot of your burrowing animals, a lot of times they may not even be looking for your bulbs per se. They might be looking for insects. So making sure that you're keeping those plants healthy and stress-free and that there's not a lot of insects around them, maybe that could help. We have in our gardens here, we just put them in because the deer kept coming and browsing on everything that we had. We have vegetables out here. I got some motion sensor irrigation heads. And so they just pop into the ground. You hook a hose to them. I set them to only go off at night. And then anytime they sense any movement, they shoot it with water and it makes the critter run away. So that might be something that you want to look into as well. But really, unless there's some sort of physical barrier to keep the animals out, it's something you're gonna have to deal with.
Yeah, it's stinking varmints.
Yeah,
Josh, I'm going to stick with you for just a little bit longer. And you kind of already
sure.
mentioned with the tulips, the chill hours, and we mentioned how it's similar to kind of to some of our fruit trees. So, what can you want to explain what chill hours are and like, what's the big deal?
Yeah, so chill hours are generally below 45 degrees, but maybe not quite down to freezing. Now we're getting beyond chill hours at that point, but there's a certain amount of that that a plant needs to see for apples, for instance, because you mentioned apples earlier. There is most of the apple trees grow in the northwest of the country for a reason, because they get cold for a really long time, and it meets the requirement for that plant. Well, a lot of bulbs have those same requirements. Things like tulips have those same requirements. If you're not meeting those chill hours, it makes that plant unhealthy. It makes it stressed and it makes it die out a lot faster or just not grow in the first place. And when they don't grow, they don't have fruit, they don't have flowers, they don't have any of the stuff that you're looking for. So you have to know what you're planting. You have to know what you're putting in your gardens. You have to know how much chill hours they have. You have to know your environment. You have to know how many chill hours we get. And here in the Northwest, we get more chill hours than anywhere else in Florida, but we still don't necessarily get a lot. So you really do need to get some of those low chill hour bulbs, and then those would be the types that thrive because you're putting them in the right place.
All right. Yeah. Going right back to that principle number one. You don't have to waste all your time digging things and put them in the fridge,
Mhm.
find the right plant for the right place and go with it. Okay, I got some questions now on specific plants that I want to go over. And I am going to start with Beth, and we're going to do caladium. So, caladium bulbs, what should we do if we want to maybe dig them out and separate them and kind of propagate our caladiums? Well, how should we handle that, Beth?
Yeah, so the good thing again about caladiums is we typically are pretty mild here. So a lot of people will just leave their caladiums in the ground and let them overwinter. The foliage dies completely back. You have a total bare spot in the winter. You don't know it's there. Again, you don't want that area to be too wet. So don't water it if you have irrigation going, maybe cut it off that area. And luckily, I think you'll have good luck with those coming back in the spring. But if you do need to dig them up, so once that foliage completely fades back, you can carefully dig up that area so you don't damage that underground structure. You can kind of set them out to dry on a paper. You want to do this in shade. You don't want these out in sun. And then remove any leaves that are still attached. And then if you have some pieces you can easily separate off, you can do that. You are going to store them in a dry area. A lot of people will put them in a paper sack to kind of keep things drier, but in a temperature that's not going to get too cold. So, we're looking at something, gosh, if y'all need to help me out, maybe 50, 60 degrees over winter. Keep them in those kind of temperatures so that when spring rolls around, this is a warm season plant. So when the soil starts to warm up, then you can set your caladiums back in and go to town.
Yeah, caladiums are great. The one thing when they disappear, remembering that you have plants there, that you don't put other stuff there, right? It's the tricky part with some of these bulbs. They disappear for a while. Okay, we mentioned daffodils a couple times, so let's bring up some daffodil questions. And someone asked the question of, they planted daffodils, but they don't ever seem to flower. So what might be going on there? And I'll give this one to Josh.
So Beth had already mentioned it. A lot of times you really do need to let that nutrition. So somewhat similar to how palm trees work, where it gets discolored and all that nutrition is flowing back into the main part of the plant. That happens with daffodils too. And so if you're cutting that foliage off early, you're not letting all that nutrition sink back into that storage bulb. And if it's not there, it's not going to grow as vigorously that next year. Some of the other things that can involve flowering, sometimes you're giving them too much light. There are quite a few daffodils that prefer a little bit of shade. And if you're giving it too much light, you might be giving it so much that it's not blooming. So you really do need to look at the cultivar that you have and figure out the exact environment that it wants to live in. Other things, if it's stressed, sometimes you won't get the bloom out of it. So if it's getting too little fertilizer or too much fertilizer or too little water or too much water, which I know are the answers that everybody likes to hear us give them,
Goldilocks,
yeah, you
everything
have
just right.
exactly. You have to make sure that that bulb is getting the environment that it wants, and it's got the temperatures that it wants, and it's got the light that it wants, and you let it retreat back from the previous year, like Beth pointed out earlier. You just let that foliage hang out, and then eventually it will die back into the bulb.
All
And
right, so that was
yeah, and Mark,
go
Josh
ahead,
made
Beth.
a really good point there. Sometimes with daffodils, if we go through a warm spring, we warm up really, really early.
Mhm.
For some of those, even though they are Florida daffodils, that really stresses them out, and you really get weak, reduced bloom, if bloom at all. So sometimes it's just our year is bad. So we really like that nice, cool spring. So sometimes what they recommend with a lot of daffodils, especially for later in the summer too, is to overplant. You see daffodils in old homesteads where it's coming up in the grass. That's
Mm.
wonderful for the daffodil as long as the grass isn't overwatered because that protects them. That kind of gives them if our spring gets a little too hot, that will interfere with the bloom and the health of that daffodil. So if you kind of notice repeatedly yours are struggling, look at the weather. But yeah, Josh mentioned a lot of good points also that we have to look at.
Okay, and let's see, Beth or Josh, forcing bulbs, right? So sometimes people might want to, the question that came in is, can we force them to bloom and then plant them outside? Maybe answer that question and maybe remind us what we mean by forcing these bulbs and how we might want to do that.
Sure, we can answer that. And Beth, feel free to jump in on me because I'm sure I'm going to not get this quite right. Um, Generally, when you're talking about forcing blooms or forcing anything, you're sort of artificially creating the environment in which it wants to bloom. So if we're still in like early January and you're wanting your daffodils to bloom and you have them and you're bringing them up to the right temperature to start to sprout and bloom and come out and do all the things that they need to do, you can do that. I personally would not take them out of whatever container they're in and then try to put them in the ground. I would probably just dig a little hole in my garden and pop that container into it. And that way it looks like it's coming out of the ground. I am not a big fan of when things are flowering, disturbing the root zone. So I don't tend to like to do that. But yeah, you can force them to bloom a little bit early now. Don't be putting them outside if the environment outside is not okay for them. So you can get them to come out a little bit early, but if you then stick it outside and we get another freeze and it kills that new growth back, you're going to have just as many issues as if you'd never forced them to bloom in the first place.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Or
Beth, you
you're
want
going
to
to
go
have no
ahead?
plants, that is.
Probably one of the most common ones people get for a gift is amaryllis.
Mhm.
And people want that as a holiday gift. And it's a wonderful, I love receiving amaryllis. Hint for anyone who's listening. Uh,
All right, I'll write that
so
down.
with amaryllis, we know it's not going to bloom until spring. So
Mhm.
what you do is you give it artificial conditions indoors. You get this little pot, a little bit of soil or some pebbles, and you put that bulb in there and you're giving it these artificial conditions inside. And so this bloom initiates. And with an amaryllis, we protect it. It's inside when we get cold, so we don't put it outside. It's usually on our porch or somewhere where it's getting bright light. But we're enjoying that during the holiday season. Now, when it's finished, it is possible to plant some of these outside in the
Mhm.
garden. I mean, amaryllis is probably a good example of ones that will work pretty well. Hey, I'm going to have this now for my garden next year. It's like the old Christmas tree we'd plant outside. But some don't do as well. So not every bulb transitions from being forced to planting outside. Some excellent ones, Easter lily. Yes, absolutely. Those are forced bulbs. So plant those when you get an Easter lily. Never throw that away unless you have cats or something like that because they're very toxic. But plant that in your garden and you'll have this gorgeous display of Easter lilies. They're just going to bloom later in the summer. So some can be forced and then planted outside. Others may not do as well. So, but it's always worth a try once you're done with that, enjoying that bloom inside, if the conditions are right for that particular plant, to go ahead and establish it in your garden.
All right, so if someone wants a challenge, go start forcing bulbs and see
Oh,
what you
yeah.
can do. All right, let's see. Sticking, well, here's something for like, what is if I'm wanting to grow bulbs in pots, can you give us, Josh, can you give us some examples of what bulbs might do well and what kind of pot size should we put them in?
Sure. So we have, because they're waiting to be planted in our demo gardens here, we've had some crinums that have been in pots since last spring because we haven't cleared out the space for them yet. Those have done exceptionally well in their pots. Now they're in a decent sized pot. You have to see how many bulbs you have. And of course, you don't want to get too big or too little of a pot. So you have to see how many you have and then plant them in there again, give them the right conditions, make sure they have the right light, the right fertilizer, the right um, irrigation. And when it's in a pot, irrigation becomes a big issue because it dries out a lot quicker. It is more susceptible to the cold outside. It is more susceptible to the heat outside, all of those things. And so you want to make sure that there's enough soil around the bulb to protect it. But they've done really well. They bloomed already, and they're already starting to not bloom anymore. They've already doubled. We're actually going to have to go in there and pull them out of those pots and break them apart. So we're going to have more crinums than we expected to have. But crinum is one that will do really well in containers. I think agapanthus would do really well in containers. Amaryllis, Beth already mentioned that. You get them in that little tin thing right around Christmas that you just water right in there and everything, and they do really well. There's a lot of bulbs that will do really well in containers. Tulips, this would be a great place if you want to grow tulips here to do them in containers. That way you don't have to go digging through your yard to get them back out if you want to plant them again the next year. You just pull them right out of that container. But they do really well there. Most bulbs, I think, will do pretty well in containers.
Okay, Beth, you got anything to add? Good.
Yeah, just be aware some of the bulbs that we grow, for example, we grow a beautiful blood lily and that blooms
Mm.
more in kind of the spring. And it's that huge ball that's just red of an interesting flower. That has to be protected in the winter. So we grow that in a container. That way, when winter's over, we can move it back in the garden. It will bloom, still be fine in the garden, but we never want to take a chance because it's special. So it's just this nice feature we can put wherever we want it in the landscape, have this amazing exotic bloom that comes up, and then move it back when we want to protect it if we're going to get a super good cold here. So there are lots of these bulbs as long as there's room. Lilies do wonderful in containers. The Asiatic lilies are perfect. Your tiger lily would be great. And then you can also keep it if there's like if you have cats and want to enjoy lilies, keep it where the cats aren't. If you have the indoor cats, you can move that around and have it be safe for them. But yeah, a lot of these bulbs will do really well as long as drainage is good, You water when it's needed, and then sometimes maybe a little fertilizer in a soilless media.
Okay, I think we may have gotten all the questions that are in our list here. So I'll invite anyone listening in. If you got a question you got on bulbs, go ahead and put it in there. I'm going to give a shout out to this book. So uh, Linda Van Beck. She was a Tallahassee resident and she wrote this book, Daffodils in Florida. I don't know if you guys see that or can read it, but Daffodils in Florida, a field guide to the coastal South. And she did a lot of testing of various daffodils that do well. Daffodils are pretty cool because they have all these names, divisions, and the tazetas are my favorite. They look like the little teacup on the tea little plate. And they're named Narcissus. So go study the history of that word Narcissus and the famous person from mythology, and you can see why such a beautiful flower may be called the genus Narcissus. We did just get asked online, so thank you. And anyone else listening, feel free to put something in the chat there. But do we have any suggestions for bulbs that are good for pollinators?
I mean, some of the ones we're going to have in the garden now, the pollinators will visit. I see a lot of the hair streak butterflies visiting the blackberry lily because it's a kind of a flat open flower. So they enjoy things like that. In the winter we don't have as many because some of our winter
Mhm.
bloomers and that cup tends to be too deep for them to get into. But some of the summer ones, you may have some of the other pollinators visit. One interesting story, though, the pineapple lily. We always think of insects as the pollinators, but that one is probably pollinated by a mammal. And so maybe a little rodent will visit the garden that you may not want elsewhere and pollinate your pineapple lily. So that's always interesting to think that pollinators are not just those things that are flying around. But Josh, if you knew any others that maybe specifically attract pollinators.
I don't know about specifically attracting pollinators, but when it comes to any kind of pollinator plant, you always want to think about what you want to attract and how it eats. So there's a reason that hummingbirds go to tubular flowers. They have those long, skinny beaks. They like the long, skinny flowers. If you have bees and butterflies and things of that nature, I think Beth already mentioned it, they need a much more open flower. And is there any nectar resources there? So like a lot of the lilies, you'll see a lot of pollinators on because they have a lot of nectar resources and they have a lot of pollen resources. So just kind of, again, you have to do the research on the types of bulbs that you want. You're, of course, always welcome to come talk to one of us about it, and we'll do the research for you or help you do the research and figure out what's there for the pollinator and can the pollinator get to it. And so if you plant those things in your yard, the pollinators are going to find them.
And then Beth, one more came in for you. So answering things on the fly, you mentioned that blood lily.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you go about storing the container during the non-growing season is what they're asking.
Well, the master gardeners have a protected area that they can potentially heat when it gets freezing weather. So it's just like a greenhouse, just to keep it out of the freezing temperature if it needs. It's in a container, so sometimes that can be more sensitive to cold versus being in the ground. And we just want to make sure there's no injury to that pot. So we will just keep it in. I mean, if you had a garage that you could kind of would stay warmer. It may not be ideal, but it would certainly give it protection.
Yeah.
And Mark,
Okay.
one thing I
Yeah.
would like to mention, a lot of times when we read these bulb publications, one of the things it always says is fertilize, make sure you add a 10-10-10 or a bulb fertilizer that has a lot of phosphorus. And we want to just caution people, those are just general guidelines. Remember, one of our principles is to make sure if you're going to do this soil test, know if you need those nutrients. So don't, like daffodils, when we plant daffodils, you do not fertilize in the hole. You absolutely do not amend the soil. You don't add fertilizer. You just plant the bulb and wait, and maybe a little fertilizer once things are up, leaves are up. But be cautious about just randomly scattering some of these high phosphorus fertilizers because that's a polluting nutrient. And if we don't need it, if our soil has enough, we don't want to add it.
Very good. So I think we've answered all of our questions, and I do want to remind folks that this is our last Gardening in the Panhandle live for the rest of the year. We'll probably have some more, so keep a lookup on if you're on the subscriber to the Gardening in the Panhandle newsletter, you'll get an update on when the next kind of round of episodes or series will come out. You'll also be getting a survey soon after this or after today. And so if you please, if you can, fill out the survey for us. Let us know what you think. And I guess I will leave us now. But Beth and Josh, you got anything else you want to say about bulbs as we close up here?
Oh, there's a world of bulbs out there. I mean, there's so many we didn't mention. Georgia has a really good bulb publication. There was a great specialist up there that put that together, Paul Thomas. But you can find, just look maybe from LSU, all of our extension partners, and see what they have, LSU, Mississippi State, and you're going to find some good bulb selections. But maybe try one a little bit different that you haven't
Hmm.
before.
Yeah, that's a good point. Josh, before you say your goodbye, the idea that some of our IFAS because it's a statewide Florida resource, right? There may not be a ton on bulbs because as we
Hmm.
start to go south, there are going to be less and less options, right? So you might need to look at UGA, like Beth mentioned, some of our land grants near us to get some more information on what might work up here in the weird part of Florida where it actually gets a little cool sometimes.
Where we get all those freezes. Yeah, I just want to emphasize what Beth said. There's bulbs are a great way to add just a different level to your gardens, and you'll see bulbs a lot more than you think you will. I know when I walk around in Pensacola, because I'm not too far from there, there's agapanthus everywhere. When I walk around any of the homes that I see here, I see crinums and agapanthus and all kinds of other stuff. So it's just kind of a new way to add a different texture to your landscape, and it's definitely worth investigating. You try some of the even weirder ones like Gloriosa lilies. Those things they bury themselves deep and they kind of just start popping up everywhere. So that's just a fun little surprise you get every year. And they have a very,
Awesome.
very gorgeous flower on them too. So bulbs are definitely worth adding to your garden.
Okay, well, thank you both very much, and thank you all for listening. And just keep an eye out for the next Garden in the Panhandle Live. So thanks, everyone. Bye.